Hello everyone, and welcome back to continuing your tutor training for the Adult Volunteer Literacy Program. Today, we're focusing on comprehension, and we're going to start with an activity. Go to the page in your packet called the Marlup. I will read the passage aloud, and then ask some questions. Then, after that, we'll have some follow-up reflection questions. Feel free to pause the video to catch up or take time to answer the questions. So, let's get started. A Marlup was proving his kump. Parmilly Narg horped some vev in his kump. Why did vump horp vev in my frinkle kump? The Marlup juffed the Narg. Movithi chunky, the Narg grumped. Hesht vump horpeld vev in your kump. Do vump poov your kump frinkle? Well, that was a paragraph to read. Now, for the first set of questions, we'll look at the first four. 1. What did the Narg horp in the Marlup's kump? 2. What did the Marlup juff the Narg? 3. Was the Narg trungy? 4. Does the Marlup pov or poov his kump? If you need to, pause the video and take a few minutes or so to see if you can answer these questions. Try to come up with an answer for each question. Look back at the passage if you need to as well. When you're ready, hit play. All right, keep those answers with you. Now, let's look at some other questions before we get to that last one regarding the experience as a whole. First, were those questions easy to answer? Yes? No? Chances are you were able to read this passage with some fluency. If these questions comprised 60 to 75% of a test or quiz, you might even have made a low passing grade with your first 4 answers. Let's ask a written question now. Write as much as you can for your answer. Do your best, pause the video, and write down what you think the answer is. So the question, what is a Marlup? So, what is a Marlup? Saying it's the name of this activity doesn't count, but it was probably more difficult to answer as it was a comprehension question. As you can see, reading means more than simply decoding words. Readers must also be able to read with understanding and construct meaning from the text. As we mentioned before, adults with low literacy levels have found ways to get by without literacy skills. They're often good at hiding their deficiencies. The issue, however, is being unable to read and write at a functional level is like trying to understand a foreign language. It creates barriers to healthcare access, employment, and even understanding food labels and signs. But, as we've seen with the Marlup, comprehension is important. So, there are 3 levels of comprehension, though, that we need to look at and be able to discuss with our learners. We have a couple different charts to show this comprehension. For now, let's look at this pyramid. The first level is what we call the literal level. As shown here, it's simply pronouncing words. The literal level is all about this. So, recalling or recognizing facts, following specific directions, and identifying clearly stated main ideas and supporting details, and finding literal meaning. The second level is the inferential level. Here, it's identifying and defining words. This requires the reader to make inferences about things not clearly stated. It requires some prior context and knowledge. This also includes interpreting figurative language, drawing conclusions, identifying relationships, and using main ideas and supporting details, such as what is a Marlup. The third level is the critical thinking level. As seen here, it's bringing meaning and constructing meaning. They need prior knowledge, experience, and understanding to take part in it. Some abilities in this level are passing judgment, judging logic, reliability, accuracy, and truthfulness, and distinguishing fact from fiction. Comprehension with an understanding and mastery of how to function at all 3 levels is incredibly important in working within our society and our world. People, including our learners, cannot function efficiently or effectively without some level of mastery in the first level. We need to understand the basics and have knowledge of the base building blocks before we can build with them. Think of it like building a house. You can't move up without a solid foundation. This is where tutoring and teaching. When we look back at our types of instruction, the line between direct and indirect will start to blur. It's when we start getting into the second and third levels that we can really dive into indirect instruction and letting our learners learn the content, how it works best for them. It's like letting them design their house how they want, whether it be a multi-story colonial house or a brick farmhouse or an apartment building. But the foundation is basically, for a metaphor anyway, the same. This is why understanding how comprehension works with learning is important. There are multiple kinds of comprehension: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Even math is a type of comprehension in a way. Any skill and subject, especially in teaching, has a correlated comprehension. However, for our learners, we are going to look at language comprehension as a base for helping our learners through these stages. Language is an important part in all these facets in our program, and many of the things we'll look at here can be adapted into reading, writing, listening, speaking, and even math. Before we dig in, take a few minutes break, stretch, get a snack, and make sure your packet is open to the language comprehension section as we get started. To begin, let's look at this poem by T.S. Watt titled English. You should have a copy to read along with in your packet. So read along as I read aloud. I take it you already know of tough and bow and cough and dough. Others may stumble, but not you, on hiccough, thorough, tough, and through. Well done, and now you wish, perhaps, to learn of less familiar traps. Beware of herd, a dreadful word, that looks like beard and sounds like bird. And dead, it's said like bed, not bead. For goodness sake, don't call it a deed. Watch out for meat and great and threat. They rhyme with sweet and straight and debt. A moth is not a moth in mother, nor both in bother or broth in brother. And here is not a match for there, nor dear and fear for bear and pear. And then there's dose and rose and lose, just look them up, and goose and choose, and cork and work and card and ward, and font and front and word and sword, and do and go and thwart and cart. Come, I've hardly made a start. A dreadful language, man alive, I'd mastered it when I was 5, and yet to write it, the more I tried, I hadn't learned it at 55. Now, you were able to listen as I read along, but as you can see and probably know, many of those words look the same. We've learned the tricks to navigate these, but many of our learners haven't. This includes our ESL and EL learners and our native speakers. And they likely just don't have the experience or knowledge to figure out some of the tricks of language on their own without some help, such as someone reading it aloud for them and letting them see the differences or hear the differences and similarities. To many of our learners, they would read this aloud and be frustrated because it all looks and sounds the same, or they simply don't understand because they lack the knowledge. We see this obviously in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, but even math with word problems. They can face the same difficulties of comprehension. Understanding this poem takes all 3 levels of comprehension. Our first level is base understanding, knowing the tricks that, for example, cough and dough may look the same, but aren't pronounced the same. The second level is identifying, despite similar spelling, the different meanings. An example we see often is two, and two, and there, and there. Our third level comes in with knowing and understanding meaning. In this case, understanding what the poem is trying to teach. When it comes to language, we can look at our 4 base skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Each of these has different tricks and skills needed for understanding and comprehension. But you'll see later they're more interrelated than they may appear. So let's look at some comprehension in relation to the 3 learning styles. All that reading. We can see visual and auditory working together pretty easily in relation to the poem. But how can we make this haptic? How can we make it physical? Well, if we use the poem as an example, there are a couple things you can do. One is having them make the different sounds. Exaggerate it. Take a look at this picture. This is the mouth and how it moves to make sounds. We will look at a version of this picture later as well. So cough, open wide. Do, smaller. So cough. Her mouth looks like this on the left. And do. This one here, second to the right. Have your learner make the different sounds and move their mouth. They might not be able to read aloud to themselves during a test, but they can remember the movement. This can turn pretty silly when you start exaggerating together. Beard, bird, moth. My moth might fall out of my mouth. See? A little ridiculous, but it's good practice. Perhaps more fun. Another method is taking it literally. Make some dough and ask if it's a cough. Look at deer and deer, make some pictures and some light humor. Go out and start trying to find the different words that look or sound similar and what they look like in the real world. It's a great way you can make it relevant and practical and get out and about a little bit. There are a ton of different activities you can try online or come up with your own to work on comprehension. But recognizing comprehension and how it works, the different levels, and how it's important to a learner's engagement and overall learning is important. We're going to look at reading comprehension, writing comprehension, listening comprehension, speaking comprehension, and as a bonus for later, math comprehension. We'll look at all these more closely with some examples. But as we saw back with the Marlup, without some base understanding and some tricks, like we saw with the English poem, our learners will struggle. This is generally where our learners get caught up, making sense of what is being asked of them. Also, make sure to keep in mind they likely have some tricks on their own already, so ask them about it. As a review, let's go over what comprehension is. It's been a lot, I know I feel it. Comprehension is more than just being able to understand and read the words. It's knowing and being able to apply meaning to what is being said or written within context. We saw this with the Marlup. We could technically read it and we could technically answer the questions, but it was all nonsense. I mean, really, what is a Marlup? When we then looked at the 3 levels of comprehension, what are those again? Literal pronunciation, then identifying and defining words, and lastly, context and meaning making are 3 levels. Then we looked at the poem English by T.S. Watt and how, especially with reading, comprehension can be difficult, as well as how we can use the 3 learning styles to go through the different layers of comprehension with the poem. Comprehension is all about being able to understand and communicate. Our learners can be stuck at any stage of the process, and it is our job as tutors to help them make it over those hurdles and be able to do it on their own. So let's get started looking at more in depth at the different types of comprehension you will need to understand. But that is all in other videos. That's enough for this one. Make sure to read over your notes, and see you next time.